We live in an age of fast food, endless streaming services, and sedentary jobs. As a result, American men have become physically weak. Observing this fact has led to many commentators on Christian Twitter pushing for men of Christ to get back into the gym and regain the discipline that comes from regular strength training. In response to this, another group of commentators has risen up, I should say, to have opposition to this. They are saying that to be physically strong, to idolize that is, of course, a great sin. So we've talked before on this show about fat pastors and the dangers of lacking disciplines in important areas. So on this episode of Forge and Anvil, Michael and I will be joined by professional strongman and strength trainer Matt Reynolds to discuss why Christian men should
Ex-professional strongman.
aspire. Ex-professional. No,
Retired
strongman.
professional
Strongman to
strongman.
us. Strongman to
Like
us.
when you're the president and you're 90 and they still call you president so-and-so.
Awesome.
Bush, President Clinton, they're always still a president. I always get to retain my pro strongman status.
Oh yeah, and that's how I view you. I mean, once a strong man, always a strong man. So
I love it.
that being
I'll
said,
take
Matt,
it.
you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience for those who are not yet familiar?
Sure. Thank you guys for having me on the show. I think it's the second time on the show. So, yeah, I'm Matt Reynolds. I was in my earlier life, but I'll still retain the title and fine with that. I was a elite level power lifter in 4 different weight classes from the 220s to the 308s. So, bumped my body weight up over the course of several years, and then turned my attention to strongman. Won my pro card in strongman, like the world's strongest man, in 2006. Toured on that circuit from 06 to 10. Opened up a strength training gym called Strong Gym, which grew to be the largest strength gym in the country in 08. Was actually my first career. I was actually a public school teacher, which I'm thankful to not be now. Got my master's degree to be a high school principal. By the time I finished the master's degree, I knew I wasn't going to stay in the public school system. And so I left in 2012 the public education system, the government schools, to run the gym full time. Sold the gym in 2015 and opened up the company that I own, and the CEO and president of the board now, which is called Barbell Logic. It's one of the largest online strength coaching companies in the world, and we try to provide just really highly professional, high touch service to our clients. We don't just provide, we connect clients to expert coaches all over the world. Those coaches provide not just programming through our own app, but they also you actually video yourself doing your lifts, and your coach breaks down your videos and your lifts within 24 hours via integrated screen recording. So basically it's asynchronous. So you can, we get clients all over the world. You can get a client in Singapore, they're going to train at 3 a.m. our time. And then I'll get up at, 4:30 and break down their videos. And by the time they wake up the next morning, they've got their breakdown from their coach and they're ready to go for the next workout. So that's what we do. It's been great. I've found an interesting niche over the last, I think, year and a half or so in kind of the Christian Reformed community of being, kind of the strength coach of that community, which I'm happy to be a part of. I coach a lot of my own personal clients online. I still have about 40 clients online, and most of my executives, I still make them coach because I think it's good to keep your eye refined and understand the software that we're building. And so I still coach about 40 clients, and it's over time that has become more and more a lot of reform pastors and things like that. So it's been a blast doing that. So get to do that. Actually had my first inaugural board meeting with all my investors and whatnot last week in Chicago. Went really well. Everything went great. So the business has flourished and grown, and I can't believe, the size it's become. And I can remember I was actually talking to my daughter who turns 19 here in a couple of days. I was talking to her about, I remember being 19 and I was really into weightlifting, and the internet was new, it was the late 90s. And I spent all my time, reading weightlifting articles and translated text from the old Russian, Soviet coaches that had been, communism obviously had fallen a few years before, and they translated all their books into English. And it was like this huge hobby. And my parents and my family were like, what is this weird hobby that you have? They weren't very supportive. And Mom, if you listen, you've heard me tell this story before. Now that it's a multi-million-dollar business, they're very supportive. and so I certainly never thought that it would become that either. Hence the going to school to become a teacher. And I just thought I'd be a high school principal and would coach. And I coached football, and I was the head strength coach at a big high school in Missouri. And thought that was kind of be the career, and then strength training would just kind of be, I guess it was more than a hobby. I mean, at the point that you're a professional, it's probably sort of an obsession. But I think the cool thing is, and maybe a good lead in to the conversation today, is that over time we've always tried to provide strength training and that strength training service for improvement of quality of life. Like, it's strength training and health for quality of life. That's kind of always been the thing. And my business is now in its ninth year, so it's been going for a while. But as I've become much more reformed, and I was Calvinist when I started this business, but I've become more reformed. You really start to see the implications of strength training on taking dominion and playing the long game. I want to be the jacked grandpa that doesn't just walk my daughters down the aisle, but am there for my granddaughter's weddings and hopefully my great granddaughter's weddings, and maybe if I'm really blessed, my great great granddaughter's weddings. I
Mhm.
don't know if the Lord will bless me that much, but we're playing the long game, and so I
Yeah.
think that some of that change, obviously that strength training for health and longevity and quality of life and keeping up with your kids and your grandkids, and I think taking dominion and living life well is a big part of who we are. And so I think that's it certainly is not a major shift from who we were, but I think it's kind of added on over the last couple of years to really understanding playing the long game and taking dominion for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just glad to have you on, Matt, because we've got a whole lot of stuff that we're going to be able to pick your brain about over the next while. And I mean, all this was kind of spurred on by the debate that I kind of mentioned at the opening here, that I know that you, I'm sure, witnessed, because it was very heavy, especially in Reform Twitter. Just the debate on whether or not men should aspire to be strong. And there was a group that was all for it, really emphasizing the importance of strength training as Christian men and the importance of Christians to be strong and aspire to that. And then, of course, there's another group that it kind of immediately was sounding the alarm on idolatry, saying that men were, idolizing strength training. And obviously, there's nuance to that conversation, but there definitely were the two extremes. So that's kind of where we find ourselves in this conversation. So I had thrown out a tweet of, joking earlier about fat pastors, and that's something that we've talked about. But really, what we're honestly talking about is discipline and understanding that we're not advocating for a form of Gnosticism where you actually we're legalistic about it, where if you have a certain level of once your deadlift gets over a certain number, then you're actually able to to properly exegete scripture or something like
Right.
that. Like
Right.
obviously we're not talking anything like that here. But what kind of what would both of you gentlemen, why do you think it's important for Christian men to actually strive for physical strength?
Michael, you want to take the first stab at that, and then I'll
Sure, man.
follow up.
Yeah. Multiple times, there's a biblical precedence to this. And oftentimes when it comes to athleticism, we like to look at Paul saying, run the race set before you. And it's like, yeah, sure, that's good. Or when he says, physical training is of some value, but spiritual training is greater. That's good as well. I like to look in the Old Testament. I'd like to study the Old Testament a lot in my life. And I look specifically to Job. And, Job is messed up and he's all beaten down and he's complaining to God and he's got his friends that aren't very helpful. They are also trying to give him advice that isn't that great. And God comes into the conversation around chapter 38 and 40.
Yep.
And both times when he starts talking to Job, he says, the way that we translate this is gird up your loins like a man,
Yep.
or dress for action like a man. And I want to talk about that just a little bit because each of those words in the Hebrew is really interesting because he's basically saying put on strength like a warrior is another way we could translate that because the
Sure.
word man there is a gever. It's not like a just a male. It's not a human. Sometimes we say man, mankind is like the same thing, or
Sure.
it loses its gender. The manhood that God's speaking about here, as well as through the Proverbs and the Psalms, even in Lamentations 3, is a great example of this word, where manhood is defined in strength and fortitude. And
Yep.
I believe in this case, God is saying to Job, dress yourself in strength like a man have testicular fortitude because what I'm about to tell you isn't going to be comfortable. And then he proceeds to really humble Job and kind
Yeah.
of put him in his place a little bit
Yeah.
and
Who
give
were
him some
you?
perspective.
Who were
Yeah,
you when I
exactly.
spun
Where
the
were
earth
you when?
into? Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Told the waters to only come this far is it's one of my favorite
Yeah.
chunks of scripture for sure.
So certainly strength is an initiative that we are called to time and time again, and strength is not just our tendon strength, it's not just our muscular strength, it's our mental strength, but oftentimes that is a multifaceted endeavor that we can cultivate through physical training.
Yep. Man, you said that great. I mean, I think that we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater with strength, and I think often we look at maybe the bodybuilding crowd, which is just very aesthetics based, and I'm going to get on stage and have a beauty pageant with other guys, and so people, especially in the reform community, will kind of shy away from that and say, now I would also shy away from that. That's not really what this is about. And I'm not saying that there aren't great Christian bodybuilders. I think it's tough to do. But for us, I think again, Job's interesting, right? Because it's we think the oldest book in the Bible, and then but it's not first in the Bible. So we get the story of creation and the covenant with Abraham, with Noah and Abraham, and obviously the fall before that. But then there are a lot of examples in kind of the Exodus and taking the promised land, and Caleb going and be like we're strong and we're strong and ready to go. And this, he literally is talking about like we're stronger than the men we're going to fight. Like put us into battle and we will win this battle for the Lord. And it's a strength. When you see in Proverbs, like the glory of young men is their strength. And it literally means physical strength, or the Shema, like love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And this is a statement of totality. And so, yes, we love the Lord with our heart and with our mind and with our soul and with everything we have. But part of the everything we have is the physical piece. And so when we see that physical strength or physical training is of some value, it's like there's a value there. And so I certainly wouldn't argue that physical strength is the most important thing in life. I don't think it is. I think it is generally excellent for everyone, men, women, Christians, non-Christians. I mean, we've seen a lot of people it causes people to take personal responsibility in their life. Nobody's going to make you put a heavy barbell on your back and squat. And so the kind of idea of voluntary hardship is very refining. And often the spiritual strength is a little different, obviously, but the mental fortitude and the emotional fortitude and social strength, and those things often are downstream from physical strength. And so, I mean, in my own life, I was always this skinny, nerdy, Baptist preacher's kid. And when I started strength training, it gave me the confidence it was amazing. Like, certainly I gained physical strength, but I also gained a lot of mental fortitude. You learn how to do hard things under the bar that nobody's going to force you to do. We know that we are called to suffer in Romans 8, and then there are going to be involuntary hardships that we get called into. And so when we practice voluntary hardship, I think it better prepares us for the involuntary hardship that we know will come at some point, some more than others. And so, of course, I think there's a huge benefit to that. And so, I built my career and our business around this thing. And the other thing is it's not, obviously we've got thousands of clients, and some of them are, a lot of them are not Christian, some of them are atheists, but I think that for any of them, that step of doing voluntary hardship and taking personal responsibility in their life is often the first step in moving the right direction. And so I'm proud of what we've been able to do. That, certainly that doesn't mean if you squat, you're going to become Christian and reformed and believe all like we do, but it's a good step in the right direction. And it's not very controversial. I mean, with the exception of some of the mainstream media saying that, right. If you lift your right wing, and if you lift I saw the article this week. It's like, if you lift weights, it's gives you a 7x potential increase in heart attacks, which is the most ridiculous.
7 times.
The
Good
opposite.
grief.
Yeah, yeah. Guys that exercise are 7 times more likely to die of a heart attack. It's completely
Yeah,
ridiculous.
because
So,
obesity doesn't cause heart disease.
yeah, it's right. Like, what's the biggest cause of heart disease is like people being fat and metabolic syndrome and so, it's just, again, you've got this idea with culture has started to pick up on like, oh man, if people lift, if people get strong, they take personal responsibility for their actions. If they take personal responsibility for their actions, they can't be a victim. If they can't fall into victimhood mentality, they can't be woke. And if they can't be woke, then they can't follow the narrative. And so
Bingo.
we should keep people from lifting. I mean, I really think that's what the thing is. And so
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. And listen, I know I've got clients and I've even got coaches who are very left leaning politically, who still lift. So it's like lifting, I'm certain doesn't make you right wing. But at the same time, I do think it is interesting that as more people, as you lift and you get stronger and you do hard things, and it doesn't always have to just be, heavy strength training. It's like you go, prepare for a marathon or a 5K or whatever the thing is. I think that that choice of taking voluntary hardship and doing something that no one else is going to make you do, and you choose to do the thing, it certainly better prepares you for when somebody gets cancer, that which may be you and maybe a family member, or when you have to have a hard discussion with a family member or church discipline conversation with a church member or whatever. Like, you're just better prepared for that. And so I think there's a ton of benefit there. And we just like you said, Michael, we see this in the Old Testament a lot. There's a lot of references. There are a lot of references to actual physical strength. And I think strength is one of those weird words. It's like in English, like the word love, right? And we know everybody's heard the story about, there's all these different words for love in the Greek, the different types of love. But we say like we love pizza, we love our dog, we love our wife, we love Jesus. And it's like those are all different versions of love. And we often use strength the same way. It's a strength, like, okay, she beat cancer, she was really strong. Well, like it's not really strength. It's like mental fortitude. Maybe she was physically strong, or maybe the person was physically strong that beat cancer. I think it would prepare you well. As a matter of fact, we've had a lot of clients who've gotten strong and then gone through cancer and beat cancer. And I think a lot of that is because, and certainly they would say that even more than I would. I had a text from a guy today who's pushing 60, who battled really intense cancer. He had like back in his like kind of throat or jaw. And he thinks the thing that saved his life was the fact that he was strong. And when he came back from the chemo and the radiation, he went right back to strength training and started with the empty bar and got strong again. And now he's hitting all-time PRs, and the guy's in his 60s and, stronger than he's ever been in his life. And he's like, this changed, this saved my life. So I think that for some people, it's got there's more weight to it than others. And I think for others, we joke about the fat pastor problem. And I do think it is a problem, right? And so I was saying on Twitter that I am empathetic there because I've been that guy before too. Yeah. But the reality is that it shows a lack of discipline somewhere.
Exactly.
And so if we expect our pastors, and I think we should, and I think it's something you're called to be, is disciplined. And so these pastors are often very disciplined in their theology and their preaching. They take the Bible seriously, but if they don't take their physical health seriously, then you can see that there's something missing there. And I've equated it as well in other podcasts to pastors also who are really struggle financially. And for some of those pastors, because their church is paying them $10,000 a year, the churches support their pastors well. But pastors are constantly struggling to keep the lights on at their house. It's usually a lack of financial discipline. And so I think those things will show up sometimes in the lives of pastors or church leaders. And you can say, well, look, this is a deficiency where we have to have more discipline. And I think one of the advantages we have in the Christian community is that, I've talked about this before, where to me, if you do discipline for the right reasons, it should lead to motivation. If you do discipline for the right reasons, you see Jocko and he takes pictures of his watch at 4:30 in the morning or whatever, and posts every day, and 4:05 or whatever. And I would argue that Jocko is actually not disciplined about waking up at 4:05 in the morning. I actually usually wake up earlier. Than I wake up at 3:30, but I don't take pictures of my watch. Now here's the thing: I like getting up at 3:30. I like getting up I don't set an alarm. Just what time I wake up, and I go downstairs and start working. And so the question is am I disciplined in waking up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning, or am I motivated? It brings me joy. I get great work done from 4 a.m. till 7 a.m. when my family wakes up. And I think a lot of times that discipline that we do in strength training, it works the same. When you first start to train or exercise, you often don't want to do the thing. You get off the couch and you do it. But if you do it for the right reason, I lost my monitor. If you do it for the right reason, then you will often find that a couple weeks after you're doing it out of discipline, so there's some white knuckle discipline to start, that discipline often turns into motivation.
Right.
And then you're motivated to do the thing. Once you're motivated to do the thing, if you have motivation for the right reason, which leads to joy, that motivation turns into habit. And so pretty soon training or eating well or keeping good stewardship of your finances just becomes part of who you are, the same way you get up in the morning and brush your teeth and take a shower and tie your shoes. And so I think that's really what we're trying to do with strength training. We're trying to get people to understand like this is just part of who we are and part of what we do, and it's not elevated necessarily above the other good things that we do. You're talking about it being an idol. Can it be an idol? Yes. I mean, like anything can be, right? And I think mostly in the Christian world, we tend to take good things and we turn them into idols and turn that into sin. You see this with women who do this with their children. You see this with men who do this with their work. Good things that we're called to do, but they're not to be idols. They're not to be elevated above our love for the Lord. And so strength training and physical training and looking great and all that kind of stuff, that can become that too. So we're constantly, it's the old adage of we've got the ditches on both sides of the road, and we're trying to keep the car on the road. And so you can go one way and become the fat pastor. You can go the other way and become overly focused on aesthetics and how you look. Both are sin. Both are idolatry on some level. And our goal is to help people keep the car on the road.
Yeah. And the reality is I just started getting back into strength training again, at the beginning of the year. And really I'm just getting back into general fitness. My goal is to get stronger. So of course I am training to get stronger. But I don't necessarily have a specific PR goal in mind as much as I have a goal of just general fitness. And immediately I've only been back at it for about month and a half or so, almost 2 months or so. But one of the things that I immediately am delighting in is the fact that I can throw my 2-year-old above my head a few dozen more times than I could a couple months ago, and I just don't tire as easy. There's just some like everyday blessings that general strength is a wonderful way of amplifying. And again, it can become an idol, but ultimately we're not. I think it really just boils down to not falling on either side of the ditch, like you said, but ultimately just leaning into God's created order. I think so many of us are not living in a way that is normal when you would look at even just like back. Honestly, even just a couple decades ago, but especially back 100 years ago, the amount of lifestyles that we had, we no longer are this like primary agrarian culture or anything like that that keeps us naturally physically fit. So nowadays, when you have a work from home job, you got to do what you can to make sure that you actually get off your lazy butt and and make yourself go to that gym and that voluntary hardship, like you said, so that you can actually enjoy the fruit of honestly your youth. Like God made men to be strong, at least during their youth, and as you've already displayed for us, Matt, even long beyond that. But you don't enjoy it if you don't actually lean into the gifting that God gave you, which is a body capable of being physically strong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, as Christians, part of the reason this is an important conversation, and Matt, you mentioned earlier the idea of finances. That's another area where we are called to stewardship, and Jesus has a plethora of lessons about finances and stewardship of those finances. I think physical fitness is an area of stewardship where we are better equipped to serve God and to serve his purposes if we are more physically able.
Sure,
And
of course.
the area that I learned that the best, if I can just tell a little story here, In 2012, I had the privilege of going to Nairobi, Kenya on a cross cultural ministries training trip where I engaged in evangelism in dialogue with locals as well as other missionaries in the area. And we went into some of the worst slums on earth. And I had the privilege of helping to build a wall around a church so that the church grounds would not be vandalized by the people in the slum. Well, the pastor of the church was a man named Paul who had lost his leg to polio when he was a child. And
Mm.
for a one legged dude, he was a very strong and powerful man who would pole vault around on a single cane
Right.
as his
Right.
crutch. It was awesome. But I remember here I was, this little high school kid who, I was a wrestler through high school. I had some strength, but not much. I probably weighed a buck 60 soaking wet, and I was 6'5" at the time too. So
Mm.
here I was, this
The
scrawny
skinny.
kid,
Yeah.
doing the best thing I could, and I was carrying bags of concrete back and forth to help the men to do that. And at certain points, I would put one on either shoulder and carry him. Well, that was a Saturday. The next Sunday morning, we attended that church, which this little church is a lean-to against a wall, just a tin shack held up by wooden planks. It was not an elegant church by any means. And we sat on benches in front of this one-legged man who preached ferociously the gospel in a beautiful way. And he preached the Shema, just like Matt mentioned earlier, loving the Lord with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And when he got to strength, he pointed at me very deliberately and said, "Our brother Michael here. Yesterday I saw him lift 50 kilos like it was nothing. And that is loving the Lord with all of his strength. And
Mm.
I pray that he continues to do that all of his life, and he compelled the others to do the same." And I don't say that to say that, wow, I'm so amazing, because I know by a lot of our standards, I was very weak physically at the time, but I was, I had trained myself enough that I was able to serve this community with my strength, and it became an example of loving God with my strength. And that always stuck out to me. And I felt, I didn't feel like I was being put on a pedestal as an example for anyone else. I felt that that man was
Sure.
preaching to me and saying, God has given me this body. I have a responsibility to the Lord to steward it well so that I can serve him with the strength of my back every day of my life. And to do
That's right.
anything less of that would not be honoring to God.
That's great. Agreed. And coming back to the story I was telling about, we use strength, that word strength, in a lot of different ways. But if you look at the actual Shema, it's literally talking about physical strength there, like, because it's a
Mhm.
statement of totality. It's trying to pull out all of these things, like your intellect, your heart, your soul, your mind, and your physical strength. Like we glorify God with all of those things. And if the chief end of man is to glorify God, then we have an opportunity to glorify God with all of those things. And again, I think that, especially for whatever reason, in the Reformed community, we tend to be a group of people who lean on our intellect and our knowledge of doctrine and theology and Bible, all wonderful things, are probably more important than physical strength. But we often put such emphasis on that we forget about the need to glorify God with our physical bodies. And so I don't think that means, putting on a pink thong bikini and having a beauty pageant with other dudes. I think I think we're talking about taking dominion. I think we're
Yeah.
talking about leading and serving and supporting and providing for our families well. I
Right.
think if we're playing the long game and I live a life that kills me at 61, then I didn't get to play much of a long game. I want to be like,
Yeah.
I've got eternity to be in heaven and I can't wait to get there. But I would also love to see as much of this long game, that see if we're able to really move the ball down the field and see if my kids are able to do the same and my grandkids are. I want to see as many generations of Reynolds do that as possible. And the best way I can do that is to glorify the Lord with my body, with my physical body, with my strength, with my performance, with my quality of life, with my health, with my longevity, like all of these things, which is far more than just how much can you bench press or how much muscle mass you have or whatever the thing is. All those things are actually, I think, are solid metrics to show that you're moving in the right direction. But ultimately, I want to be here for a while and see the thing,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Connor.
Go ahead. No, you've go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say about those measurables. Matt, last time we talked, you threw out some standards,
Okay.
and you said body weight overhead press, 1.5 body weight for bench, 2 times body weight for a squat, 2.5 times for deadlift.
Yep.
And being a 6'7",
It's
250
hard to do.
guy,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
has pissed me off every day since
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
And
I
it's been
get
a
it.
great motivator. I've started a very disciplined progressive overload so that I can rub it in your face, but
No, it's
uh,
good. I hope you
not
get to.
just to rub it in your face, but to
Yeah. Yeah.
glorify God, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. For
But
sure. For sure. Yeah. And I would still
Humbly.
stand by that. I think just about any male who is, certainly if they're under 45, let's say, and they still have a decent amount of testosterone in their system and they're healthy, they don't have any major injuries. I think anybody can achieve those numbers. I think those numbers are achievable for anybody. You have guys come on sometimes, some of my clients, and they say, "Do you think I can deadlift 600 pounds?" I'm like, "I don't know, 600 pounds is pretty heavy," And so, but we can get to those numbers. Like those numbers, if you're consistent, you'll hit those numbers. I can see some of my clients that are on this call right now, and like I'm training them, and some of them are newbies, and they're just it's just about consistency, and the lifting is also about playing the long game. You're not going to have the body you want or look the way you want or hit the milestones that you want in 6 weeks or even 6 months. It's a long game. And so, and again, I think it's part of it. For me, this is kind of just the way I'm wired. I always enjoyed the process of getting strong. And I love to compete. I mean, competing in powerlifting and strongman were super fun, but I actually really like the process of getting there even more than the competition itself. And I tended to be good at competition. You see this some, and I don't know why necessarily. I would tend to rise to the occasion and do well at competitions and perform well. But ultimately, like the joy, if I look back, like my best memories are actually in the process of getting there, not in the actual competition themselves. And so, I think when we play the long game, I turned 45 a couple weeks ago, and so I'm probably not ever going to hit a PR again. I mean, I was a professional strongman back in the, again, 2006, 2010. So the chances of me deadlifting 800 pounds it's probably not going to happen. So I've torn both pecs. Like the chances of bench pressing 500 pounds, I'll never bench press 500 pounds. And I got really close. And but that's okay, because that's not what this is about. And so the concept of the PR, or what we call the personal record, is still something that we keep. And so I keep PRs now, like post 40 PRs, like post 40-year-old PRs, because that's not the same guy that was 32-year-old professional strongman Matt. And so again, because I'm playing the long game, I don't want to go to the gym and be depressed or like, oh, I'm not as strong as I was when I was 30 or 33 or whatever. So I'm 45. Well, no, of course, but to me now, the most important metric to me now is consistency, is getting in and actually training 6 times a week, getting in and doing something. I don't lift heavy weights 6 times a week, but I'm doing some form of exercise, and I take Sunday off. It's the Lord's Day, but I try to do something Monday through Saturday, and that's, if I do that, I tend to stay healthier. Things hurt less as I get older. I perform better. I feel better. I'm more present with my family. I'm more mentally focused and on the business. All of those things. And so that's the goal. So whereas when I was 30 and I was trying to be a barn burner in the professional performance competitive world, it was really more about numbers on the bar, and it's less about numbers on the bar now. And I don't want to take away from that, because I still try to push numbers on the bar up. I think that the load on the bar actually matters. But I don't have to shoot for a 500-pound bench press by the time I'm 50, because that's probably not going to happen. But if I shoot for getting in the gym 6 times a week, then like I'm 45, I can still bench 315 for some reps. That's pretty strong, especially for for anybody. But especially for a 45-year-old guy who's a CEO of a company and works a ton, and then
who's
Connor,
torn
like you were
both his
saying,
pecs.
yeah, who's torn both my pecs. That's right. That's it. If you go way down in the Instagram, you'll see like all the bruised up. Actually, I think I did an article for Art of Manliness for Brett McKay when I tore my pec, on how I rehabbed it. And so you can Google that article and you can see the pictures of the giant bruise on my pec. And I started bench pressing the next day, a 33-pound female bar, to get blood flow to the pec, and so it wouldn't scar, and to lay down collagen, The muscle, for those of you guys who are watching, the muscle tissue is a contractile tissue. It has, let me see if I can do this. You have sliding filaments on your muscles, and so they actually slide over each other. Like when your bicep, if you've got your arm is lengthened and you look at how long your bicep is, it's long. And when you bend your elbow, flex your elbow, it becomes shorter. And so that's because the muscles, the sliding filaments slide over themselves. And so, yeah, when you injure yourself, we even have ways that we work around that. I go, look, what most people do when they injure themselves is stop. They just stop training. They don't do anything. I see my client and good buddy Stuart. Yeah, Stuart's got this deal with his foot right now. He's a great Reformed pastor. And he's like, what do I do, boss? And I'm like, we're going to keep training. We're just going to work around it, because if you don't do anything, you don't get better. And so, people hurt their back or they hurt their knees. Like, everybody's got a bad back and bad knees. Like, it's just, by the time you're in your 40s, you have bad back and bad knees, and everybody does. And so they go, well, I can't lift. Like, well, how's your back going to get stronger and more resilient and less vulnerable to injury if you don't lift? Like, we all know our parents throw their backs out. They drop their keys on the floor and throw their backs out. It's not from deadlifting. And so I'll never forget, years ago, it's probably 15, 20 years ago now. It's been a while. In the early days of Strong Gym, we had a chiropractor come in, and a good chiropractor, not a weird new age chakra chiropractor. There's a lot of those out there. Like a sports chiropractor. Oh yeah, and they are few and far between, but 1 in 10 are decent probably. And so anyway, he put these like nodes on our back, and he connected it to a laptop. And I don't know if it was like an EMG, it may have been an EMG machine, like electromyograph, like basically showed the muscular contraction, the blood flow. And we had all these, big time powerlifters. I mean, we had 20 guys that could deadlift over 700 pounds. And I think he thought he was going to go in there and hook this thing up, and you're going to have all these guys with terrible backs, and he was going to get a bunch of business out of it. And so he came one Saturday morning, and we told the client, we told our lifters, come and lift, and then you can get hooked up it's totally free. The chiropractor will see you, and we're just kind of do a diagnosis on the back. And I can remember as each guy went in, he got more depressed because everybody's back was perfect. So they're in there, wow. They're deadlifting 700 pounds, or they're picking up 350-pound stones and you can't pick up a stone without a rounded back. You lift a stone rounded, which is like not a great way to lift, but the stone's on the ground. It's not like picking up a deadlift where you can set your back like flat. You're picking it up rounded. And he was like, I've never seen such healthy backs. Like, yeah, everybody's strong. Everybody has a strong, healthy back. They go to the grocery store and pick out the average 67-year-old woman, put it on her back. Her back's a mess, right? But she'll say, yeah. or the Uncle Rico football star from Napoleon Dynamite. So I can't deadlift because I threw my back out in college, or I threw my back out in high school, or whatever. It's like, yeah. Well, how is your back going to get stronger? How's your back going to get more resilient? Like, well, if you've got a good coach, you can actually lift correctly and start very conservative, and you can titrate the weight up a little tiny bit at a time, and your body adapts. It's amazing. The body's amazing. I mean, God was amazing when he developed our body's ability to adapt. And so, we tell clients all the time, we don't care where you start. You come in, and if you're deadlifting the empty bar, and I probably told this story the last time I was on the podcast, the lady I coach, it's 87, and the Methodist, organist, and I taught her how to deadlift a 15-pound kettlebell stacked up on hymnals. That's what she deadlifted the first time. And then a few years later, she was deadlifting 155 for sets of 5. Like real deadlift, barbell, weights on the floor, just like a powerlifting meet. And so, and her back was fused together, and she had double hip replacements and a knee replacement. Like, anybody can do this. You just like, but you're playing the long game. She wasn't going to get there in 2 weeks. Right. Yeah. So, okay. So let's start with the 15-pound kettlebell with hymnals stacked on the floor. And then what we did is every workout, we pulled a hymnal, and we made the deadlift. We made the kettlebell a little closer to the floor. And then we got the kettlebell, and then we got up to a 45-pound kettlebell. And then eventually you put the bar in the rack, and she's deadlifting the empty bar, but on the safeties, a little weight. And then let's pull the safeties. Let's put the bar on the floor. And you just started deadlifting a little more weight. 3 years later, she's deadlifting 150. Like that's in your 80s as a female with double hip replacements. And so, you're listening to this, and you're like, what's your excuse? You can do this, but I still see this. I still get this. And again, if you're listening, and there's I have a handful of guys who are very well known in the Reform community who have reached out to me over the last couple of months. Are like, I I need to be in great shape and I need to drop 35 pounds and look great in like the next, 6 weeks. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, oh, that's not sustainable. Like, okay. Can we get you looking better in 6 weeks? Yes. But it's whatever we're going to do over the next 6 weeks, you have to understand is completely unsustainable. And so what we're trying to do is we're playing the long game. Just play the long game. Like, I promise you, if you do this, if you do it well and you do it consistently, in 6 weeks, you will feel tremendously different. You might not look that different. You might look at yourself in the mirror and be like, I don't see a huge, but you will feel different. And 3 months later, you'll look different. And 6 months later, you'll be a different person. And, a couple of years later of consistency, I mean, you're like, you don't hardly remember the person that existed 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When it comes to cultivating physical strength and the longevity aspect of that, of course, I think one of the most obvious ways that guys try to kind of jump that ship or accelerate faster than maybe they should is through PEDs, performance enhancing drugs.
Sure.
Is there something to be said aside from that? Is there something to be said about the abilities of guys who are using PEDs as opposed to not? Like, it comes to mind Clarence Kennedy, an incredible weightlifter who's done more than any human probably could at his size. And in the past few years, that's been a testament. But it's pretty well known that he's using PEDs. Is it even possible or attainable to achieve that sort of strength per body weight without that sort of enhancement?
No.
Okay.
Simple answer. Everyone who is competitive at a national level in any strength sport, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, including myself, when I was doing it, was on performance enhancing drugs as part of the sport. I mean, when you're at the top level of the sport, that's what people do because you're playing for fame and you're playing for world records. And it would be, I mean, just think logically, it's impossible for someone to set a world record without performance enhancing drugs. That is not possible. Now, my guess is that we don't have a ton of listeners that are going to listen to this that are on performance enhancing drugs. However, an interesting thing has occurred over the past 15 years, let's say. We kind of hit the low point in the 90s with early 90s, especially like Lyle Elzado was I don't know if you guys, you guys are too young. There was a guy who played for the Raiders. He's a great player and ended up dying of brain cancer in the late 90s, I think, or the mid 90s, early 90s, maybe even. And he said it was from the performance enhancing drug use that from all the years, like in the 70s when he played 70s and 80s. He played for the Raiders. Later, we find out the guy died of AIDS. It wasn't performance enhancing drugs. That's like, now, does it increase your potential for heart disease and certainly kidney or liver problems? Like, absolutely, it does. Now, what's happened? So when that happened, and in 1988, if you guys, again, how old are you guys in 88? Were you guys born in 88?
Nope.
So old. So in 88, Ben Johnson, Canadian, set the record in the Olympics in the 100-meter dash and beat the golden boy Carl Lewis from the United States. And then the next day tested positive for Winstrol for performance-enhancing drugs. His coach was Charlie Francis. And it's a funny story because Charlie Francis has since died. He's the greatest track coach of all time. Charlie Francis said, we had him all kinds of performance-enhancing drugs, but not Winstrol. Somebody spiked his beer or something, and that's how. And I actually believe. I mean, like I believe that Winstrol is actually an oral solute that's aqueous, like it's in water. You could actually literally squirt a little bit in a beer or any drink. You would never taste it. So he's like, we weren't stupid. We knew how to beat the drug tests. He was on all kinds of drugs, but he wasn't on that, right? And so the combination of this Canadian beating our American golden boy, by the way, was also on drugs. That's never been proven, but if you look at his face in '88, is so covered with acne, it's ridiculous. And he's an adult man; he's not 19, so he's on drugs too, because everybody's on drugs. The combination of that and Lyle Elzado dying of brain cancer and then blaming it on steroids caused this weird, what the mainstream media does. It was a great story, and so we're going to run with it. And everybody was like, performance enhancing drugs kills you, and it's going to give you brain cancer, and all this stuff. And it's anti-American, and but for those of you listening to this and you're 40, 45, 50 plus, you should go get a blood test and see what your hormone levels are, because there is a difference, a tremendous difference between hormone replacement therapy or TRT and performance enhancing drugs. Now, when I say that, they're identical drugs. It's just synthetic testosterone is what you're taking. But the difference, to put it in perspective, of what your doctor would put you on for synthetic testosterone as a replacement of, like, your testosterone's low, i.e., you are struggling with your normal masculinity issues, like you're essentially becoming asexual, which happens, and don't even know why. Have all sorts of stuff that we're doing to the water and the food and Lord knows what, and the vaccines, and I don't know what's all causing it. But testosterone is very low. It's half of what it was. Our grandpas at our age had, their testosterone was double the average American male in their 40s. And so if your testosterone is low, you should go get it tested. And if it's low, you should bring it up to normal. And that's legal and fine and can be prescribed by a doctor. So on average, you're going to be prescribed about 100 to 125 milligrams of testosterone a week for testosterone replacement therapy or hormone replacement therapy. A professional bodybuilder is going to take 6,000 milligrams a week. 6 grams. 60x the amount that your doctor is going to put you on. So that's the difference. And high level powerlifters and strongmen, they're probably not on quite as much. They're probably on a gram or 2 grams. So it's still 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams as opposed to 100. So, they're 10 to 20x what your doctor is going to put you on. So it's the exact same drug. It's the exact same pharmaceutical, but the amount that you take is tremendous. And so again, it's dose dependent as far as side effects go. And, like, if your testosterone is low, you're going to be lethargic. You're going to have low libido. You're going to have tough time sleeping. Your recovery's poor. You have a hard time with protein synthesis, i.e. then muscle mass. You have a hard time putting on muscle mass. All those things those side effects are far worse. I don't know that I've ever met anybody who had low testosterone and was put on testosterone by their doctor at 100 milligrams a week or 125 or something like that and regretted it. If you take 5,000 milligrams a week, now you're talking about, you get a thickening of the left ventricle of the heart, and cardiovascular, your heart grows basically, and it's not really meant to grow because it's a muscle still, and liver problems and kidney problems, and so you obviously you start to see the side effects really kick up there. So that's the difference between what I would call performance enhancing drugs and TRT, which is still certainly performance enhancing. But for the 45-year-old guy who's just trying to keep up with his kids and future grandkids and lead their family well, like that's something that guys should get checked out. So, and you have to understand, I always say this, you have to have a good handle on things. Like, if you've had very low testosterone for years and your doctor puts you on a normal amount of testosterone, it kind of feels like you're going through puberty again. And so you really do have to be careful. I mean, if you struggle with lust, if you struggle with pornography, like I would say the side effects of that are worse than the side effects of having some low libido and low muscle mass or whatever. And so, I'm not telling everybody to do it. You've got to make a choice for yourself, but it's still a good thing to have tested. I mean, I think every guy should go out and get their blood tested every year and check your cholesterol and your triglycerides and HbA1c, which is kind of the pre-diabetes, all those ApoB and all that stuff. Like that stuff is easy to get and cheap to come by at this point. So at least you have some baselines. And if they're healthy and you're 30 or 35, you know what your baseline is. So then as you turn 40 and 45 and 50, you can compare to what you were at 30 and see how much the numbers change. So I think it's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. So someone that I've kind of recently been looking into a lot more. I had the privilege of being on his podcast, although it hasn't released yet. I'm not sure when, but the Raw Egg Nationalist. And, he's been talking a lot about slonking eggs, and he talks a lot about the protein in eggs and how they're a great source of protein, as I'm sure you'd agree. But something that I thought was interesting that he's kind of drawn to people's attention is the cholesterol in eggs and how it's not nearly as bad as maybe the experts have made it out to be. So what's your thought on just the idea of slonking eggs? Michaela in the chat earlier said, I need to know how many eggs I should be feeding my husband daily. So what kind of tips about, I love your thoughts on both the eggs, the cholesterol, but then also like protein and just some principles on how men can be dieting in a way that can help them to build strength and make sure that they're they're getting all the nutrients that they need for healthy testosterone levels, as well as
Sure.
just making sure that they can actually build muscle and they're not just depleting everything when they go to the gym.
Yeah, sure. I think the hardest thing to do for most men and most women, by the way, and it's actually equally as important for women, is to get enough protein. And it's actually harder for women because women have lower protein synthesis, right? They don't have testosterone. The ability for them, women will look at other women who are jacked, let's say, and they'll go, I don't want to look like them. It's like, I don't want to eat a bunch of protein and lift weights and get jacked. Like, that's not possible. There's only two ways to get jacked as a female in the weight room. One is to use performance-enhancing drugs, which if you see a professional athlete who's jacked, that's what they're doing. Or it was a girl that weighed 300 pounds and was fat and has lost 60 pounds, and now she's 240 and way more jacked, but she's still 240-pound female. And so ladies will look at it and be like, I don't want to be 240 pounds and jacked. Yeah, but she was 300 and sloppy like a year ago. And so protein synthesis is hard for females. So it's very hard to put on muscle for females. So females, what will happen is if they lift heavy, and they should lift just like men, there's no difference in the way you should lift, but because of our hormonal milieu, the response to your body will be different. So for men, you're going to put on, if you have adequate testosterone and you eat adequate protein, you're going to put on muscle. For women, they're going to put on a little bit of muscle, but mostly their muscles just going to get hard. It's going to get firm, which they call toned, which is not really a physiology or kinesiology term. But what they really just mean is like, I don't want big arms and I don't want this like flappy thing underneath my tricep or whatever. And that goes away and they get what they think is toned. But really what it is, it's a hardness of the myofibril in the muscle tissue. So it's just muscle gets hard, which is what they want. For guys, when the question is, I need to know how many eggs I should be feeding. What's that guy from Parks and Rec? What's this? The libertarian dude. What's his name? Nick Offerman. Why can't I think of his name? Anyway, and Nick's like, all the eggs and bacon. Did you like? Have you guys seen that? And so just feed him all the eggs. There's not too many eggs. And he orders a steak at a diner, and they bring him this like hideous looking thing that's been on a flat top griddle, and he's like, "What is this?" And they said, "A steak." He's like, "Take it away." He's like, "Bring me all the eggs and bacon you have." He goes, "Oh, I fear you didn't hear me correctly. I didn't say bring me a lot of bacon and eggs. I said bring me all the bacon and eggs you have." And so that's you need as many eggs as you want. Now here's the thing about the raw egg nationalists that is a little bit problematic. Raw egg whites are not very digestible or at least the protein is not easy to synthesize. And so the egg yolks raw are great. They're full. That's where all the vitamins are. It's where the fat is in the egg yolks. The egg whites are where the protein is. The best way to eat your eggs is actually lightly cooked egg whites with, like sunny side up, raw, relatively raw or, very runny egg yolks, but where the white becomes less translucent and, more opaque. It's going to digest easier. I'm sure, if you're chugging 10 and 12 eggs at a time, you're certainly probably getting plenty of protein, but it's not super easy for your body to digest and consume. And actually meat is actually easier to utilize and turn into usable protein for muscle synthesis the more raw it is. Now, hear me correctly. I'm not telling you to eat raw chicken and raw pork, but this is why you should eat your steak rare and medium rare. That's why sushi is way better than cooked fish, because as you cook the protein, it actually denatures the protein a lot of times. So a lot of that protein gets denatured and is not really, it's digested. Don't get me wrong. Doesn't sit in your gut and doesn't digest. I mean, but it's going to pass through, but it's not going to be able to be used as protein synthesis. So my typical rule of thumb, and this is obviously a massive blanket statement, most men need to aim for 200 grams of protein a day. And that's actually not as hard as you think. I mean, if you eat like a bird and you intermittent fast in the morning and then you only eat a light lunch and dinner, you're not going to get 200 grams of protein. It's just not possible. So I don't have anything against intermittent fasting, and I don't eat anything for the first 3 or 4 hours of the day I'm awake because I get up so early. It's coffee for me, but it's hard to get enough protein in. So I try to eat 3 normal meals a day that have real protein in it. And then I live on, and most of my clients and those of you who are on the call know, I love like the Fairlife protein milks or the Fairlife Core Powers. that you get at either Costco or Sam's, and the Core Power is like 42 grams of protein, and the Fairlife protein milks are 30 grams of protein and pre-mixed. There's chocolate and vanilla and coffee and strawberry and whatever, and they're delicious. And my fridge is always full of them. And if I just need a quick 42 grams of protein, I can grab it and chug it in like 4 seconds, and I got 42 grams of protein. So if you eat 3 meals a day that have 50 grams of protein in it, which is not that hard. I mean, like a giant chicken breast off of one of those rotisserie chickens from Costco or Sam's, which are, I'm sure, heavily laden with steroids. Chickens they're not supposed to be that big, but the chicken breast one chicken breast is like 90 grams of protein. Now, not your average chicken breast, but I'm talking about those big rotisseries that come from Costco or Sam's. That's 90 grams of protein. It's easy to get 50 grams of protein, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then just have one shake. 42 grams, it's 192. Good. Done. Go to bed. So it's not that people sometimes are like, I can't eat this. Well, what are you eating? You know, like, well, I'm eating tilapia. Like, yeah, it's hard to eat 200 grams of protein of tilapia. And just like I said with the females, the same is the case as you get older, male or female, your protein synthesis goes down. So it's actually interesting. We look at like 22-year-old guys. We're training a bunch of guys in the Air Force right now. We got some military contracts, the EOD guys, the explosive ordnance disposal, the bomb guys. They're crazy. And people will look at them. They're 22 years old, and they're these like athletic, special forces type guys, special operations guys. Like those are the guys that need to be eating 225 grams of protein. Those guys could probably get away with 125 grams a day and build all the muscle they need to, because they're like 22 years old and walking bottles of testosterone, like not exogenous testosterone. There's like the way Jesus made them, right? And so, but when you're a 70-year-old man or woman, your protein synthesis goes down a lot. And so the percentage of caloric intake your protein needs to be actually goes up. And so you actually need more and more protein as you get older, or more and more female. Those are the two things that actually really matter. And so, or vegetarian, which I can't imagine you have lots of listeners here that are vegetarian, but the quality of vegetarian protein, like I would never count the protein. Like, remember when you're a kid and it's like you get Wonder Bread and it's like, it's got 5 grams of protein in it. It's like 2x more protein than the average bread. Like that's completely worthless protein. It's not at first, it's not a complete protein. It doesn't have a complete amino acid profile. So you want protein. I always joke and say, you want to eat protein with something that had a face. If it had a face or laid an egg, which had a face, then it counts, right? So, milk is fine too. So yeah, that's the goal. So 200 grams of protein for guys. And the older you get, the more protein you need, at least the more percentage of your caloric intake needs to be protein.
What's your thoughts on like raw milk then, since you mentioned milk a moment ago?
I love raw milk. That's actually what I was drinking when I won my pro card in Strongman. The problem for me now is when I graduated high school, I was 160 pounds. I got married at 170. I pushed my body weight up to 310. And, now I'm like 245. I've lost like 60 pounds. And if I drink raw milk, the fat content is just so high. I'll just get fat. But I love raw milk. I love raw milk. If your husband is underweight and needs to put on 20 pounds of muscle, raw milk's awesome. I mean, it's fantastic. And I live in the Midwest. I mean, it's everywhere. So I didn't have to buy it from I wasn't worried about the DEA coming in, which they do sometimes, and let in illegal immigrants and then arrest the people that are buying the raw milk off the. So right. I could just go to a dairy. I would go and get a 5-gallon Culligan water container from Lowe's or Walmart or whatever. And I would go to the dairy that had all grass-fed milk. And I would just go to the holding tank and say, what would you charge me for 5 gallons a week? And at the time, this is probably 15 years ago, they were like, $1.25 a gallon. I was like, what? They were like, $1.25 a gallon.
Wow.
So I'd buy raw milk for $1.25 a gallon. Literally, the cows would be standing, they'd be milking the cows, would be going into the stainless steel holding tank. It wasn't even cold yet. It was still like room temperature, the temperature of the cows. And I put it in the Culligan, just 5 gallons. And then I got a beverage fridge down in my basement. I just stuck this thing, turned it on its side, stuck it in the fridge. And by the end of the week, the rule was I had to have drank all 5 gallons of raw milk. And then the next Monday I would go and get another 5 gallons. So that's how you become a pro strongman. And a lot of drugs. And a lot of drugs. So don't do that part. So remember, that's probably a little easier to keep the fat off.
So what about dairy, like in general, and these type of foods that I'm not super into the dietitian side of things, but I know there's a lot of foods that supposedly can raise estrogen in a man. So,
Yeah.
what kind of food should men be avoiding? What kind of food should women be avoiding?
Yeah.
Maybe just some general principles there.
Yeah, and actually to come back, because I didn't answer your question about the cholesterol, dietary cholesterol does not, it's shown to have like almost no increase in bloodline cholesterol levels in humans. It just doesn't do it. And so cholesterol, oh, I keep losing my monitor. Sorry, guys. Cholesterol in and of itself is not unhealthy. It's a health marker for people. And so typically if you have high cholesterol, it tends to also identify that you might have additional plaque levels in your arterial veins, in your arterial sidewalls. Sorry, I'm going to try to plug my monitor back in. I don't know why it unplugged on me. So it tends to show that, and so it in and of itself, high cholesterol is not necessarily unhealthy, and so it tends to be a decent marker for the potential of extra lipids in your bloodstream, in your on your arterial walls. And as you lay down more fat and plaque and triglycerides on your arterial walls, then you'll get calcium deposits on top of that. And when you get calcium deposits on top of that, I'm going to switch my monitor. I apologize. When you get calcium deposits on top of that, that's what, when you get these calcium deposits on top of the plaque in the arterial wall, then that's when you tend to have a problem with potentially that plaque can break off, and it will lead to a blood clot, or can run up to your brain and cause a stroke or whatnot. And so cholesterol in the past has been a decent marker for that, but it's not the best marker. So now we have much better markers. For example, you can get a 54 slide CAT scan on your heart. Usually people, it's not even insurance, and most hospitals charge like $70, or it's under $100 for this. And they'll do like those 54 slides of your heart, and they'll see how much plaque and how much, it's called the calcium score test. You can see how much calcium, if you've laid down plaque, your body will produce calcium to sit on top of that plaque and basically cover it like a blanket. And what a statin does, which I'm not a big fan of statins unless you have predominantly you have genetically very high cholesterol. A statin is generally not a great drug, and it's also typically only good for middle-aged to older men. So I would typically not, and I'm not a doctor and not giving medical advice. But what a statin typically does is it lays down an extra blanket like on top of the plaque and on top of the calcium, so that it won't break off of the arterial wall and cause if it runs to your heart, it causes a heart attack. If it runs to your brain, it causes a blood clot, and you'll get a stroke. And so dietary consumption of cholesterol almost never leads to an increase in cholesterol in blood lipid profiles. And so that's triglycerides are probably a better indicator than your cholesterol. The ratio of your HDL, your high density lipoprotein cholesterol, to your LDL, so what most people call HDLs are healthy cholesterol, and LDL is unhealthy cholesterol. Also, those are on a spectrum, so it's not like you just have high density, there's stuff in the middle too. Those are also, that ratio is also probably pretty good. On the other stuff, man, here's the thing. If you have all the other things in place, so if you are eating 200 grams of protein, you're eating mostly single ingredient foods, and specifically carbohydrates. So if most carbohydrates, you're not eating processed carbohydrates, but you're eating rice and potatoes and fruit, let's say those three. So single ingredient carbs, not Krispy Kreme donuts, not bread. Sourdough bread, ladies, are fine. We love it. It's, made from home. It's got 3 ingredients in it. It's okay. But not bread from the store, not McDonald's French fries, not processed foods. If you have all that stuff in place and your macronutrient breakdown is basically correct, so you're eating about 200 grams of protein, let's say, maybe equal amount of fat, equal amount of carbs, 200 grams of carbs, and maybe 100 grams of fat, something in that ballpark. It's basically going to be like a 33% caloric ratio between protein, fat, and carbs. If all that is in place, and you've already hit the big stuff, that's the base of the pyramid, then I absolutely would start to look at things like fluoride in the water and seed oils and all the stuff that people talk about. I think that stuff does matter. I think that I see again in the Reformed Christians and trad people, they're like, seed oils are evil and fluoride. And I agree. Like it's probably all poison. but then they still eat crap and they don't train, they don't exercise. Like, come on, let's hit the bottom of the pyramid first. Train, get your protein in, eat single ingredient carbs, stop eating Twinkies, which also are probably full of seed oils and all the other crap. And then you can start looking at some of that other stuff. So, of course, I'm not going to buy I'm not going to buy seed oil or like cook, I'm going to cook stuff in coconut oil or olive oil or butter or lard or, beef tallow. I mean, I think that's smart and wise to do. I think using a water filter, especially if you're on city water and not well water, I think that's smart thing to do. But I also think it's kind of the top of the pyramid stuff that often, people will really focus on those things when there are other, it's kind of the speck in the eye versus the plank in the eye sort of thing.
Right.
Like let's get the big stuff figured out first and then move on to the smaller stuff. And estrogen, same thing, soy, but again, do you know a lot of, here's the biggest problem I see with soy in the United States. This is, I can't imagine people who are listening that don't know this, but like if you have an infant at home and for some reason you can't breastfeed or whatever, do not feed your infant sons soy formula. That is hideously bad. But if I go eat Japanese food and they give me miso soup and it's got a couple pieces of soy in it, like I'm gonna eat it. Who cares? Like it doesn't matter, right? Like that's so minor. I'm not like most of I don't have a bunch of calories coming from soy, so it doesn't matter that much. But the problem that I really see is and a lot of people don't know. I mean, I've had friends that are, for whatever reason they couldn't breastfeed or the baby had a medical problem and was separated from the mom for a couple weeks while they were, in ICU or whatever. And so the mom's breast supply dried up and they couldn't breastfeed. And they're like, yeah, we got formula. And like, what kind of formula? Like, we're feeding them this soy, because they said it's better on it. Like, oh my God, get your sons off that. That's a problem. And so yeah, I mean, what your children are exposed to in the early years, and not to go off on a rabbit hole tangent, again, I know your listeners will agree with this, but this is the problem beyond the moral issue of biological men competing against biological females as trans women. Obviously, all sorts of moral and spiritual and ethical issues there as well. But the problem is the amount of testosterone you're exposed to while you're being carried and while your mom's pregnant with you. The amount of testosterone you're exposed to as an unborn child is exponentially higher than any female is ever going to be exposed to. It changes the hormonal milieu forever. So even if some horrific parents transition their sons at 7 or 8 or 10 or and put them on the puberty blockers, they will always have more muscle mass, more protein synthesis, more testosterone. Even if they take them off of those, put them on testosterone blockers, what it has done to their body in the first 10 years of their life can never be reversed. Now, you screw them up for the rest of their life hormonally with all of that. But that's why I can't even believe this is an issue. Why nobody even looks at it. Again, so we have all these rules about you're not allowed to take exogenous testosterone for performance-enhancing drugs like in the Olympics or what they all do, but they work their way around it. But like that's against the rules. But if you are a biological male competing against biological females and you've somehow decided that you're a woman and you can be on estrogen and testosterone blockers for 2 years, like, yeah, you're basically a woman. You can compete as a woman. No, you can't. You're still way more masculine than the females you compete against. Likewise, on the other side, they'll take females and they'll load them up full of steroids, which are illegal for performance-enhancing drugs. Let them take it and then compete against the men. They still get killed, but like this is the clown world that we live in. So yeah, hit your protein, fat, and carbs first, single ingredient foods, and then worry about the fluoride and the soy and the seed oils second.
Grief. Yeah. We live in a crazy time. The fact that we even have to discuss these things.
Nuts.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's just the world we live in. And everything that you said, Matt, is all thought crime that you are not supposed to espouse.
I know. If it comes out on Barber Logic, I'll be in trouble. They'll cancel me probably, but it is what it is. So it is bizarre that we will make the case of fairness for one, and we will sacrifice the fairness for all or for everyone else on behalf of what the left calls the fairness for one. So you've got a boy who thinks they're a girl. Let's be fair to them and let them compete against the girls. So it's fair to them. Like, it's not fair to the girls that they're competing against. It's bizarre that we've created this thing of fairness. Like, it's like life is fair anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not even life. You
The
know,
world
like,
is not egalitarian. There's just,
Yeah.
there's hierarchies in the world, and we can't
Yeah.
pretend that everyone is equal and everyone's the
Yeah.
same, and we're all just a cog in a
5'2",
machine.
you don't get to go be in the NBA.
Right. Prime
You
example.
can't
I mean, I'm 5'8". I'm 5'8". I'm not in the,
identify as
I'm not
7 foot tall. Like, you're just nope. Sorry.
Yeah, Michael's at least 6'7". I mean, so he's got that going for him. Whereas,
Well, notice that and it's I've started to see a tiny bit of talk on this on Twitter or X, that the one place that they don't tend to push on this very hard is in professional sports where there's tons of money. Like,
Mhm.
why aren't there more 5'2" white women playing in the NFL or in the NBA?
Yep.
Like, wouldn't that be fair? Like,
I
you
also
guys-
think it'd wake up too many normies. I don't think that they're ready to push that far yet. I think that that might do it. Honestly, that's something that Michael and I talked about as well. Is just the sports bros that don't get up off the couch, and they just, their idol is sports. They're watching 3-4 games a week, and they're not involved in their children's lives. They're not involved in their local politics. They're not involved in their local church. And I truly actually think that that's a lot of it. I think that there is a sleeping giant that they want to keep comfortable. They want to keep them sleeping, and
look,
so they'll
I
throw
don't
in a
have-
little
and
bit
I'm
of kneeling in the anthem, and that's about it.
Yes, and I'm sure even like, sports are great to play. To play, not to worship, right? I was telling the story at church actually Sunday. I had a buddy years ago, probably 10 years ago, who's a huge NFL fan, a huge like Tennessee Titans fan, and his brother had won season tickets to the Tennessee Titans in Nashville. And at the time, I was born in Houston. I was a Houston Texans fan, but I have 2 daughters and a wife, and they're not really interested in. I'm in Missouri, so it's Chiefs country, so we certainly watched the Chiefs a little bit this year. But I haven't really watched sports for 10 years. I used to be really into sports, and I haven't watched them for years because if I'm watching sports, I'm not spending time with my family. I don't have sons that want to watch sports. And my wife didn't want to watch it. My kids don't want to watch it. So we're going to do things they want to do. And so he invites me 10 years ago to see a game of the Texans against the Titans. And, that somebody scores a touchdown for the Titans and everybody jumps up and touchdown, and they raise their hands up above their head. And, a couple weeks later, I invited him to church, and he came to church, and the church I was going to at the time, which was not charismatic at all, but not reformed, kind of more of a Big Eva type church, not the church I go to now. There was raising of the hands during the song singing and the worship and whatnot. And afterwards, he's like, "What's up with the weird like raising of the hands and the worship song?" I was like, "It's the same thing that you do when the Titans score a touchdown." And he was like, "You could see the light bulb go on." He was like, "Oh," I was like, it's worship, right? Like they're again, without who knows how much authenticity there was on either side, but like, like they're at least think and maybe are worshiping the Lord as we're created to worship, and you're worshiping a football team, and it looks exactly the same, the same. And then you could see the light. He was like, "Oh, he got it," I was like, "Gotcha." So that's it. So
Isn't that horrible?
That's it. Yeah,
But such a valuable lesson.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think that that's just the day and age we live in. Everyone has to worship something, which I understand the concern. I think that so many of the commentators had that were kind of when this thing blew up, and it was really a lot more of a discussion a couple months back about physical fitness within the church. But I understand the whole point of them being concerned about idolatries. Was it Chesterton who said that the heart is an idol and an idolatry factory?
It was Calvin.
Calvin, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely further back. But it's the same concept that you can make an idol of anything, though, and sports is an idol. Movies is an idol. I don't know why. I feel like I know a lot of pastors that are super obsessed with pop culture.
Yep.
That tends to be an idol. And honestly, to go back to sports, the amount of pastors that I see, and this has been at every church, and including many of the ones that I go to. And so I'm not calling out any pastors specifically because there's great pastors that maybe fall into this category. But it's like the only manly thing that you're allowed to actually mention from the pulpit is sports,
Right.
and it's like
As
it's
if
so
that's
unfortunate. What was that, Michael?
As if that is manly, but
Right,
Right.
right.
it's
But that's
perceived
just it.
manliness.
But to my point earlier, that's where the men are. I mean, not necessarily the younger generations. I think the younger generations are more into gaming, but
Yep.
I think
Video
a
games
lot
and cell
of
phones. Yep.
you know, everyone over the age of like 40, there's definitely a sports obsession. In a way, it's the circus that goes along with our bread to
Yep.
keep us
Yep.
satiated. Because honestly, the amount of I find it odd, I guess I should say, that there's just this normalcy around sports fandom.
Yep.
Meanwhile, it's like, guys, like, you know, the same people that are going to get on you for, you know, idolizing politics because maybe you know what's going on, you know, the recent news stories are the same guys that are going to turn around and be able to list all the stats of their
That's right.
fantasy team. And
Yep.
it's like, you know, if you want to talk about idolizing politics, sure, that's fair. You definitely can make an idol of politics, but which one actually matters at the end of the day? I mean,
Sure.
do you benefit your neighbor by knowing the stats of your fantasy league? I think you probably benefit your neighbor by knowing the name of your mayor, your city council, and
Sure.
knowing what things that they're voting on a little bit more. So I just find that idolatry and that hypocrisy to be unfortunately rampant among evangelical Christians,
Sure.
Reformed
Well,
Christians, you
they're
know.
living vicariously, I think, through athletes is what's going on. And
Mhm.
so if you're playing fantasy football, which I don't think is inherently a sin, I haven't played fantasy football in 10 years, but I used to. But if you play fantasy football, but you don't do anything physical, you got a problem. If you're playing fantasy football, but you're not playing sports, you're playing fantasy football and you're not lifting weights, like whatever the thing is, and like your outlet to physicality and exercise and sports is fantasy football. If you're LARPing, that's what you're doing. I mean,
No.
you're just living vicariously through the athletes, right? And look, I watched a little bit of sport. I watched no sports for the last 10 years. In the last year or two, I watched a little golf and a little bit of NFL. You know, I'll watch a guy like Patrick Mahomes and like, man, this guy is like the freakiest athlete among all the other freaky athletes. It's wild to watch. And I can watch it and just be like, I can't imagine what it would like to be there. So I get it. Like you see it and you're just like, boy, it'd be cool to be that athletic, you know? But also, like, I lift and ride my bike and I hike and I ruck and I do the things. And so if all I did was sit at home and play fantasy football and watch all the Chiefs games and then all the Monday morning quarterback shows, like that's a problem. And so, and again,
There's
I
an
mean,
important
it's
distinction.
not a new problem, right? Like it's just look at the Israelites, look at the Israelites in the desert, you know, and it's just like it was this constant battle of idolatry. And because we don't make golden calves anymore, then we write it off. It's like, well, it's not like really an idol. It's not really like, you know, but boy, I love The Chosen. Such a great show. It's like, hold on. that's an idol too, right? Or what, you know, or boy, I love the Chiefs, or boy, you know, whatever, or boy, I love my kids, or I love taking my kids to the baseball tournaments every weekend and missing church, or like idol kiddos. Sorry, I don't know what to tell you. It is, right? And so
Yeah.
and it's not that I don't struggle with this in my own life. Everyone has idols in their own life that they constantly have to battle. I was in Chicago all last week for board meeting, and it was a pain in the butt to fly home on Saturday. But I flew home on Saturday so I could make church on Sunday. And it would have been much easier to fly. I mean, I still had business to do on Saturday, got to the airport, flew home so I could be at church because that's the Lord's Day. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm like, I'm not saying you can't ever miss church, but we take this stuff seriously. And so, and then we should. And so, you know, Sunday is not about football. Sunday's the Lord's Day. And so that's I think that's the other problem is that you get this sacrifice of the thing that really matters, like the faith and the Lord's Day and church community and your family and leading your family well or leading your community well or whatever. And you sacrifice those things for stuff that doesn't even matter. It's not important for the fantasy football team or the video
There's
game.
an important distinction that you made earlier, Matt, is that you can still enjoy those things and not idolize them. There's certainly
Of
a
course.
place for recreational athletics and watching athletics, as there is a place potentially for pop culture.
Yeah.
Although I don't understand it, but that's these things don't have to become idols. But like we said at the very top of this conversation, Matt, you were talking about disciplines and Jocko's discipline or lack thereof. Not that he does a lack of, it's just the
Sure.
waking up early may not be a discipline. It's a motivation and it's now a habit.
Yep.
Our disciplines become motivations and become habits. And when we become disciplined on fantasy football, and then we're motivated to continue consuming that sort of recreation until it's a habitual lifestyle that rules our livelihood.
That's right.
That's when it becomes
That's the
idolatry.
problem. Yep. That's right.
And we need to
All right,
orient our disciplines towards being Christ-like and towards
the things that matter.
the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah, I'm writing a book. I got to deal with Forbes. We've got a book coming out later this year called Undoing Urgency. And really the focus of the book is about removing the unimportant, urgent things in your life so that you can focus on the things that are most important, which are never urgent, right? Spiritual disciplines and family and church community and health and longevity, like the stuff that actually matters. That none of that stuff is actually ever urgent, but it's the most important. But we'll be overrun in our life with urgency. Talking about idols, I don't think I've called this out on a podcast before, and I'm not going to name anybody by names, but I definitely have people in my mind. Man, the idol of celebrity among culture, including the Reformed pastor culture, is something I see that is a pervasive problem, especially on Twitter, on X. There are a lot of guys who everything they post on Twitter, I agree with, or most of what they post, I agree with. But you can see it and you go like, this is a plea for celebrity. This is a plea for clicks and likes and virality and whatever. And I'm just like, it's not. Are you spending that same amount of time pasturing your flock, are you shepherding your people? And so, man, that cult of celebrity is seductive to all, and we've seen many a pastor fall from it. And it, when we were kids, it was the televangelist pastor, but now it's going to be the Twitter pastor. It's going to be the X pastor. It's those guys that continued to push on just being viral and saying things that inflame or ignite or whatever. And I'm very worried that there is going to be a few big time falls over the next few years for those pastors who have been sucked in to the seductiveness of celebrity on Twitter.
That's encouraging to hear that you're seeing that, because I feel like I've been sort of seeing the same thing. There does seem to be a faction online that they kind of will rubber stamp anything if there's a name tied to it, and it's kind of like, well, is the name where you're like, is the name the filter that you're going through? Is if
Right.
this pastor has put their hand on it, or is your filter Scripture? And that sounds obvious. And most of our camp would then immediately agree with us, but there's still just this tendency to, oh, well, because this person's a wise father in the faith, therefore, like, I shouldn't test what they say to Scripture. And it's like, whoa, like, take a step back, make sure what they're saying is scriptural. And I've even noticed instances where I've seen some men in that space that have smaller followings, and some of these big guys have called out the big guys, and I've watched those men basically stop being invited to all these things, all these reform podcasts. And if we're talking specifically about reform Twitter, a lot of these reform there's like a blacklist, and it's like, oof guys, like that should be a red flag. If you're blacklisting someone for heresy, okay, but if you're blacklisting someone because they gave you a criticism that was potentially valid and
admonishment,
that's a huge concern. So hopefully,
it's funny. I've thought a lot about this because, especially with like the older church fathers, for me, they're important in my life. But as I think about my theology and my doctrine, and I've talked to my pastor a lot about this, like they're at least in my mind right now, I would say, like, they're clearly third. And what I mean by that is Scripture is our ultimate authority, right? Like, we appeal to Scripture, sola scriptura. That's what we do. And so we weigh everything against the balance of the words of what Scripture says. That's God's word. we use God's word then to develop a good and right systematic theology. I think that matters. I think having a good theology and understand so that you don't take God's word out of context. Like that's important to compare it with other verses of, you can see continuity. It's why you need to know all of Scripture. And so that systematic theology is really important. But then I also will look at the church fathers, especially the reformers or the patristics. And you're looking at Augustine and like go all the way back, whatever. And you look at those guys and you go like, look, these guys have stood the test of time for at least 500 years, if not a couple thousand years. And if they stood the test of time, and I am believing something that's completely different than what any of these guys that I've respected have ever said, right? Like I saw a podcast. It was called The Reformed Charismatic the other day. And I was like, the Reformed Charismatic? I was like, does anyone exist like that? And I guess maybe as I started thinking about it, I was like, there's some more of those, so it's fine. But I thought, if I develop a systematic theology that is completely different than what the church fathers have ever said, then to me that should be a red flag. Now it's third, because it's sola scriptura first, it's systematic theology, and then I start to look at one of the problems we have, but it's also can be a great benefit, is the fact that we have the entirety of the world's knowledge, like right here on my cell phone. So I do get access to, there are wonderful, great minds, wonderful Christian men, incredibly smart theologians that are alive today. They're posting on Twitter, they're posting on X, they're putting out great blogs and podcasts and YouTube videos and whatnot. I can learn a lot from them, but man, I got to be careful, especially with the guys in the present, because we're all depraved, we're all fallible, and we can all fall. And so, and I went through this in my when I first became Calvinist. I was part of that kind of young, restless, and reform crowd which wasn't really reform, but if it's the Chandlers and the Driscolls and the Pipers and the Kellers and stuff. And I was like, these guys are amazing. And like, since then, I've watched most of those guys fall because I put a ton of emphasis and effort, and I worship them like other guys would worship like sports guys. And then like, this is the problem with essentially putting someone on a pedestal that's in the present. Let's let them die, and that's 500 years later. So when you start to, you're like, all right, like we can talk about Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and Augustine and John Knox, and okay, like they're probably not going to fall at this point. There's probably not going to be any kind of major catastrophes,
major sex scandal coming out.
Yeah, probably not. They've probably gotten through that. And so it's important. I think it is important, because you look at those guys, you're like, they were really, really intelligent. They're really smart. They built off each other. They learned from each other. If you come up with a systematic theology, it has nothing to do with anything they ever said. I think that should bring up a red flag. Like, maybe they were smarter than you and you don't quite have it figured out. So I think it's important. But when it's like, oh, just because I'm in, this pastor's camp, I'm going to believe everything that's been said. Like, they're fallible, man. And by the way, so were those guys, right? Like none of us agree with everything Luther said or everything Calvin said, or like we read what and we're like, we're pretty good on this and this and this. And then like, this thing was they're a little dodgy on this issue. So you got to be careful with that stuff for sure. So you can make it an idol. You make doctrine an idol. I mean, I think we do this. We make doctrine an idol, make theology an idol, the intellectual knowledge of Scripture an idol. Again, all good things, right? Children an idol, work an idol, whatever those things are. Like, Christian people tend to not make cocaine and hookers idols. That's not our MO, right? Our MO is making good things idols. We take good things and we turn them into something that they shouldn't be. And absolutely, exercise and strength training can be that. But just because it can be that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and decide not to strength train and not to exercise. And like, food can obviously be an idol. We have a massive obesity problem in the United States. We don't stop eating food. Like, right. You have to have I don't like this term very well, but you have to have a right relationship with food. You need to understand, like, you need to be able to eat food in a healthy way that's glorifying to the Lord. So you don't stop eating food. You don't stop exercising. So all of these are connected, I think, from a philosophical standpoint, to understand what is healthy. And so again, every one of these things, just like we started the show with, there's two ditches. There's the idolatry side, and there's the throw the baby out with the bathwater side. And of these good things are good things for a reason. There's grace, there's common grace there for us, and even beyond that for us, for Christians, that we can lift weights to the glory of God. My atheist friends cannot. They cannot lift weights to the glory of God. It's still a good thing for all. It's common grace. My job is to keep the car on the road. Don't let it turn into an idol, and don't throw it out and decide it's because it's only said it had some value in Scripture, we've decided it has no value. That's not what it says. It doesn't say it has no value. It has some value. So we do it.
Yeah. Well said. I think that might be a great place to wrap it. So, Matt, where can people go to
Awesome.
find you and keep up with everything that you're doing?
Yeah, so the company's Barbell Logic. You can find all kinds of stuff. We put out tons of free content, really high quality, highly produced content on the YouTube channel, Barbell Logic YouTube, Barbell Logic podcast, all that fun stuff. Barbell Logic on all social media. I'm at Reynolds Strong on all social media. And yeah, look forward to the Undoing Urgency book coming out by Forbes here in a few months. Pretty excited about the book coming out. And, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Of course, glad to have you. Michael, where can people find you?
Well, I will be diving deeply into the books this semester, so I won't be on the podcast quite as often. But I do want to leave you, as always, trying to make a habit out of it, a scripture. That's Proverbs 24, verses 5 and 6. So I'll read that here. A wise man is full of strength, and a man of knowledge enhances his might. For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory. So we've had good counsel today, cultivating strength. We appreciate you, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Go to our Substack, forgeandanvil.substack.com. If you want to support us in what we do, you can subscribe for free just to get the free content. And then we do have some stuff behind the paywall as well if you are willing to subscribe. We really appreciate the support. But thanks again, guys, and we will see you next time.